continuation of the first video talking about the demonstration problem in Chapter 16 of process costing and managerial accounting. And so this is part 2 of part 4 question, or the part 4 of the demonstration problem. So we had just completed a report of costs accounted for, and now we're doing a report of costs to account for. So this is the report for of cost to account for is information that we can all find within the information they give us at the beginning. There's no need to complete EUP and that kind of thing. So we're literally just taking numbers and plugging them in. So to do that, we're going to find the direct materials used, so 20,000, and we're going to write that here. Then we're going to do direct labor, 9,600. Also going to do factory overhead, which is 19,200. And so your costs incurred this period is just the sum of those. Okay. And then we're going to do for direct material. So the next part is the cost. So sorry, for the next part is costs incurred this period is the next part. So the sum of those you need, but that's not called the costs incurred this period. The costs incurred this period is the direct materials used, the direct labor, and the factory overhead. And so we find that in this section. The raw materials for the direct materials, you look under the payroll for the direct labor right here, and then you're going to look for the factory overhead under the factory applied overhead column. So direct materials used, you're going to do 1,900. Then you can do 500 because we're getting that from here for direct materials, here for direct labor. So you look under direct labor incurred, and then here for factory overhead applied. So okay, and so then we're going to sum these. And together, it equals 405,300. And these should be within like $100 of one another. In this problem, they came out exactly the same. So that's really good. Okay. And now, upcoming next is part 5, which is the summary of journal entries. So the question reads, prepared a summary of journal entries to record the transaction and events for July for our raw materials purchases. So for raw materials purchases, we're going to have 2 accounts, raw materials inventory and our accounts payable. And so to find those numbers, you need to look under here. So raw materials purchased on credit right here. So you just enter 211,400 and 211,400. Your credits and debits, and that is the journal entry for raw materials purchases. Okay, so now next comes direct materials usage. So 2 accounts used in the direct materials usage, so goods in process, inventory, and raw materials inventory. Okay, and so we've got, if you look right here, direct materials used, we're going to use that 190 again, which we've used so many times. That's your entry for direct materials usage. Next comes indirect materials usage. The two accounts in this entry are factory overhead and raw materials inventory. And the entries for this is 51,400. So you see right here, indirect materials used. That's the number that you're going to enter. This is pretty simple. It's just remembering the accounts that is going to be the most difficult part for doing this on a test. So the next entry, so part D of part 5, is factory payroll costs. The two accounts are factory payroll. Spell payroll. And you're going to be paying for the factory payroll with cash. So you look right here, total factory payroll paid in cash, 106,125. Guess what you're going to write for your debits and credits? 106,125, 106,125. Wow, part D is done. We're flying. Now on to part E, which says it wants us to do entries for direct labor usage. So to do that, the two accounts are goods in process inventory and factory payroll. Okay. And so for that, we look here to direct labor incurred. Is that right? Oh, yes. Okay. For direct labor, to record direct labor usage, you go to direct labor incurred, and yes, so that's what you're entering. Okay. The next journal entry that it wants you to record is indirect labor. So we go to indirect labor 5625. So the two accounts are factory overhead and factory payroll. Remember, indirect labor is part of factory overhead. So that's why you write factory overhead, not indirect labor. There's no account for indirect labor. It's all sort of put all into factory overhead. Okay, so 5625. Okay. Now we need to record other overhead costs. So we go to other overhead costs. And what are we going to write? Factory overhead. Because factory overhead is a catch-all term for everything having to do with overhead. And other accounts. Really specific. So 71725 and 71725. Okay. Then we're going to do goods in process. Inventory. And we're going to have factory overhead for the record the application of overhead. This is part H. The process inventory is 11,000. 111,000. So 111,000 is, you can find that right here. So applied factory overhead. because it's asking for the application of that. And then part I is record transfer of finished goods from production. So we have finished goods inventory. And goods in process. So if we look here, you have cost of units completed this period, 31, 300,000, 321,300 is your cost of units completed this period. So 300. So that's where that number comes from. And since you're selling it, you're moving them from your goods in process to your finished goods inventory. That's why one is debited and the other is credited. Okay. And then the final entry is record cost of goods sold. So we're going to do cost of goods sold. And finished goods inventory. And to find those numbers, you look right here for the cost of goods sold. 34505. Okay, and that's all the journal entries. Pretty simple, just remembering which accounts, especially for factory overhead, because that's sort of a catch-all term for indirect labor and other expenses and that kind of thing. Okay, well, thank you so much for following my tutorial. Hopefully this was helpful. All right, bye-bye.